The first thing I noticed wasn't the fog. It was the horn. Not the lighthouse foghorn. Something answering it. Low. Slow. Close enough that the glass in the lantern room vibrated. I'd been on Gull Point Lighthouse for exactly 17 hours when I heard it for the first time. If you're imagining crashing waves, salty air, and some postcard view of the Atlantic, forget it. That's not what this place is. Because the fog around Gull Point doesn't drift in from the ocean. It rises from somewhere inland. And after what happened to my predecessor, I don't think it's fog at all. If you've ever worked a government contract, you know there's always one sentence buried in the paperwork that doesn't fit with everything else. Mine was this. Under no circumstances should personnel enter the inland fog after sunset, regardless of apparent emergency or audible human distress. I laughed when I read it. I stopped laughing 3 nights later. My name's Ethan Mercer. Before this, I spent 8 years maintaining weather monitoring stations for the National Weather Service. Remote work didn't bother me. In fact, I preferred it. Fewer people meant fewer problems. After my divorce, isolation felt easier than conversation. So when a contractor offered me 6 months maintaining an automated lighthouse on a tiny island off the northeastern U.S. coast, with hazard pay that was almost suspiciously generous, I signed before asking enough questions. The ferry captain refused to look at the island as we approached. I noticed that. Experienced sailors look everywhere. He stared at his boots. "You'll be relieved in October," he muttered. I asked why he sounded so sure. He hesitated. "They never stay longer than October." "What happens in October?" He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled the throttle back. "We don't dock after dark." "It isn't dark." "It will be." That was apparently the end of the conversation. Gull Point wasn't much of an island. Maybe half a mile across. Jagged black rock. Wind-bent grass. One weather station. One diesel generator shed. A small maintenance house. The lighthouse itself. Nothing else. No town. No dock workers. No tourists. No cell service. No birds. That last one bothered me more than it should have. Every lighthouse I'd ever visited had gulls. Hundreds of them. This island had none. Not one feather. Not one nest. Nothing. The silence felt manufactured. Like the island had forgotten what living things sounded like. Waiting for me at the dock was my predecessor. Or at least I assumed he was. Tall. Late 50s. Gray beard. Sunburned face. He looked exhausted. Not physically. Mentally. Like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. He didn't introduce himself. Didn't shake my hand. Didn't ask how the trip was. Instead, he looked over my shoulder toward the mainland. "They came during daylight? The ferry?" He nodded. "Yeah." "Good." Then he looked relieved. Actually relieved. As if that single answer mattered more than anything else. "You Ethan?" "Yeah." He reached into his jacket and handed me a brass key. "You'll need this." "What does it open?" "You'll know." Not exactly helpful. Inside the maintenance house, everything looked ordinary. Kitchen. Radio equipment. Generator controls. Storage shelves. Emergency supplies. Coffee maker. The previous keeper had cleaned everything meticulously. Too meticulously. Like someone preparing a house inspection before disappearing forever. The refrigerator was stocked. Water tanks were full. Fuel inventory complete. Maintenance logs organized. Every single page written in neat block letters. Except the final page. That page looked like someone had been writing during an earthquake. 3 words repeated over and over. Don't trust voices. Nothing else. Just that. Over. And over. And over. I found him loading his duffel bag onto the ferry 15 minutes later. I jogged down the dock. "Hey!" He stopped. "I've got questions." So did I. "What does don't trust voices mean?" He stared at me for a long moment. Then he asked a question that made no sense. Did they give you the inland map? The what? His face changed. Not confusion. Fear. They didn't? No. He looked toward the trees on the center of the island. There weren't many. Just a cluster of twisted pines growing around a rocky hill. The sunlight seemed dimmer over there somehow, even though the rest of the island was bright. He swallowed. They changed the orientation. What orientation? They don't want new keepers knowing. Knowing what? The ferry captain shouted that they had to leave. The old keeper climbed aboard. He hesitated one last time, then yelled across the water. If someone knocks after midnight. He stopped himself. His face went pale. No. What? Forget I said anything. The ferry pulled away. He never finished the sentence. The first afternoon was uneventful. Generator inspection. Lens cleaning. Weather readings. Radio test. Routine maintenance. The equipment was newer than expected. Military-grade batteries. Encrypted communications hardware. Backup generators that belonged in a bunker, not a lighthouse. Everything screamed federal funding. Nothing screamed civilian lighthouse. I asked headquarters why. The woman on the radio answered almost immediately. Those systems are above your clearance. I'm maintaining them. You are maintaining the lighthouse. Then what's the rest for? Static. Then. No further questions. The transmission ended. That night, I climbed to the lantern room just before sunset. The ocean stretched endlessly east. Calm. Blue. Perfectly normal. West of the lighthouse was another story. A white band rested over the island's interior. Thin. Barely visible. Like morning mist. Except the sun hadn't gone down yet. And the wind was blowing toward the ocean. The fog should have moved with it. It didn't. It stayed perfectly still. Pinned over the center of the island. I watched for almost 10 minutes. It never shifted. Not once. At exactly 8:03 p.m., the lighthouse activated. The beams swept across the water. 1 revolution. 2. 3. On the 4th sweep, the inland fog moved. Not across the ground. Up. Like something beneath it had stood. The entire fog bank lifted several feet. Held there. Then settled back down. My stomach tightened. I'd never seen weather behave like that. I convinced myself there had to be an explanation. Heat inversion. Optical illusion. Terrain effects. Anything. I kept watching. The 5th sweep of the light crossed the trees. For a fraction of a second. There was no fog. I saw something underneath it. A line. Perfectly straight. Hundreds of dark figures standing shoulder to shoulder between the trees. Then the beam moved on. The fog swallowed everything again. I spun the light back manually. Nothing. Just white mist. No figures. No movement. I actually laughed at myself. Sleep deprivation. New environment. Brain filling in patterns. That's all. That's what I told myself. At 9:17 p.m., the radio crackled. Go point. I grabbed the handset. This is Mercer. No response. Just breathing. Slow. Steady. Then a man's voice. Quiet. Turn the light off. I frowned. Identify yourself. The light is making them look static. You need to shut it down. Who is this? Silence. Then. They know your name now. The transmission cut out. I checked every frequency. Nothing. No signal source. No repeat. Just dead air. Around 11, I stepped outside to check the fuel shed. The temperature had dropped fast. The ocean smelled normal. Salt. Kelp. Rain. But the breeze from inland smelled sweet. Almost floral. Rotting flowers. Wet earth. And something metallic beneath it. The fog had spread. Not much. Maybe another 50 yards. Still nowhere near the lighthouse. Still strangely contained. Still refusing to drift toward the sea. Then I heard footsteps. Behind me. Crunch. 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 I turned. Nobody. The flashlight found empty grass. Empty rocks. Nothing. I started walking again. Crunch. 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 Perfectly matching my pace. Always one step behind. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I waited. Nothing. I walked faster. So did they. I spun around with the flashlight raised. Empty. Completely empty. Yet I could still hear breathing. Right behind my shoulder. Warm enough that I almost felt it. I ran the rest of the way back inside. Locked every door. Checked every window. Nothing. No footprints. No person. No animal. Just silence. At exactly midnight, the lighthouse bell rang once. It wasn't supposed to. The bell hadn't been connected to anything in decades. I knew that because I'd inspected it myself. One heavy metallic toll echoed across the island. Then another sound answered it. A knock. 3 slow taps. From the front door. I froze. Nobody should have been there. The last ferry had left nearly 12 hours earlier. The windows beside the door showed only darkness. Then came a voice. Soft. Calm. Almost friendly. Ethan. I felt every hair on my arms stand up. I had never told anyone on this island my first name. The voice came again. I forgot to tell you the last rule. It was my predecessor's voice. Exactly. 3 more knocks. I know you're awake. I stepped closer to the window. The porch should have been visible in the moonlight. Instead, it was hidden behind a wall of white fog. Not rolling in from the sea. Not drifting on the wind. It had climbed all the way from the island's center, and stopped precisely at my doorstep. Then the voice spoke one final sentence. A sentence that turned every strange thing I'd seen that day into something far worse. That made no sense. The voice had come from the porch. The lighthouse was nearly 100 yards away. I told myself someone had to be playing a prank. Maybe another contractor. Maybe the previous keeper hadn't actually left. Maybe. 3 more knocks. Not louder. Not harder. Just patient. Like whoever, or whatever, stood outside knew I had all the time in the world. Ethan. My name again. You've already made one mistake. Silence. You watched the fog. I felt my stomach drop. Nobody should have known I'd been in the lantern room. Nobody should have known I'd seen those shapes beneath the fog. I backed away from the door. The knocking stopped immediately. Not faded. Stopped. Like someone had been waiting for that exact response. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the kitchen with every light on, my service pistol on the table, and the radio tuned to emergency frequencies. Nothing else happened. No more knocks. No voices. Just the generator humming beneath the floorboards and the beam from the lighthouse sweeping across the windows every 32 seconds. Every time the light crossed the house, I had the overwhelming feeling something outside stopped moving. Morning didn't make me feel any safer. If anything, daylight made the previous night's events seem impossible. The porch was empty. No footprints. No mud. No salt water. Nothing. The fog had retreated halfway back toward the center of the island as if it had never approached the house. I inspected the ground anyway. Rock. Short grass. Dry soil. No sign that anyone, or anything, had been standing there. I even checked for prank equipment. Hidden speakers. Motion sensors. Fishing line. Nothing. The only thing I found was a single rusted nail driven into the porch post. Someone had scratched a tiny mark beside it. One vertical line. No explanation. By 8 that morning, I convinced myself there had to be records. Government jobs leave paperwork. Lots of paperwork. I unlocked the office inside the lighthouse and started digging through decades of maintenance logs. Most of them were exactly what you'd expect. bulb replacements, lens polishing, fuel deliveries, storm damage, routine inspections. Then I noticed something strange. Every log older than 12 years had missing pages. Not torn out randomly. Precisely removed. Entire months were gone. Sometimes entire years. Someone hadn't stolen information. They'd curated it. Like they only wanted certain events erased. The oldest intact log belonged to a keeper named Daniel Rowe. His final entry read: Asterisk. Visibility excellent over the ocean. Inland fog reached marker 3 before sunset. Heard singing again. Requested evacuation. Asterisk. The next page had been removed. The following page belonged to someone else. A different keeper. Different handwriting. Different year. No explanation for what happened to Daniel Rowe. No transfer paperwork. No death report. Nothing. He simply ceased to exist. I made coffee. Strong enough to strip paint. As it brewed, I kept reading. The same pattern repeated over and over. Different names. Different years. Different handwriting. Always ending with increasingly irrational observations. Asterisk. The fog learned the schedule. Asterisk. Asterisk. It only copies voices after hearing them twice. Asterisk. Asterisk. Do not whistle. Asterisk. Asterisk. The beam makes shadows where there shouldn't be any. Asterisk. Asterisk. If the inland horn sounds before ours, stay underground. Asterisk. Then every journal ended the same way. Abruptly. Missing pages. Replacement keeper. No explanation. 23 names. 23 disappearances hidden beneath bureaucratic paperwork. That wasn't coincidence. That was policy. Around noon, headquarters called. Not the regional office. Someone higher. The voice belonged to a woman who sounded practiced. Professional. Almost rehearsed. Mr. Mercer. Yes. Orientation review. I wasn't aware there was another orientation. There wasn't. A pause. We've updated procedures. After I got here? Correct. I frowned. Why? Because your predecessor neglected to deliver the revised guidance. Then give it to me now. Another pause. Then she began reading. Rule 1. Never approach inland fog after sunset. I've already read that. Rule 2. Do not respond to unidentified voices, regardless of familiarity. I grabbed a notebook. She continued. Rule 3. If someone requests entry after dark, they are not authorized personnel. Who would? No answer. Instead. Rule 4. Do not manually rotate the lighthouse beam west of its programmed arc. My pulse quickened. I'd done exactly that last night. Why? Rule 5. If the lantern extinguishes unexpectedly. Silence. Lock yourself inside the maintenance house until sunrise. You're skipping my questions. No further clarification authorized. She continued reading. Rule 6. If you hear the inland horn before midnight, contact headquarters immediately. Inland horn? No answer. Rule 7. If you see another lighthouse. She stopped. For almost 5 seconds. Close your eyes. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it sounded insane. Is this some kind of psychological screening? No. Then explain Rule 7. I cannot. You expect me to follow rules you refuse to explain? Yes. The radio clicked. The transmission ended. I read the notebook 3 times. Every rule implied something had already happened. Rules don't appear from imagination. Every safety protocol is written in someone's blood. Which meant every sentence on that list had a story behind it. I wasn't sure I wanted to know those stories. That afternoon I decided to map the island. Not because I planned to explore it. Because I wanted to understand the terrain. The official map showed the lighthouse on the eastern cliffs. Maintenance house. Fuel shed. Weather station. Generator bunker. Nothing else. Simple. Too simple. I compared it with satellite imagery stored on my laptop. The coastline matched. The buildings matched. But the island's center looked blurred. Not cloud-covered. Blurred. Like someone had intentionally smeared the image. Every satellite pass from the last 15 years showed the exact same blur. Impossible. Different weather. Different seasons. Same distortion. I grabbed binoculars and climbed back to the lantern room. The sun sat high overhead. Visibility stretched for miles. I focused on the center of the island. Twisted pine trees. Rock outcroppings. White fog. Perfectly ordinary. Then something caught my eye. A pole. Maybe 30 feet tall. Half hidden inside the mist. Metal. Painted white. At first I thought it was another weather instrument. Then I realized what I was looking at. It was another lighthouse. Smaller. Older. Maybe a mile inland. That couldn't be right. The official survey showed only one lighthouse. This island wasn't large enough to hide another. I lowered the binoculars. Looked again. Gone. Just trees. I remembered Rule 7. If you see another lighthouse, close your eyes. A cold shiver ran through me. That evening I searched every cabinet inside the maintenance house. There had to be something my predecessor left behind. Something unofficial. People always leave notes. Especially when bureaucracy refuses to acknowledge reality. I finally found it hidden beneath a loose floorboard under the spare bedroom. Not a journal. A cassette recorder. Old. Dusty. Labeled only Keeper 22. Beside it sat 6 tapes. Numbered. No dates. No names. Just numbers. I found an ancient tape player in the storage closet. It barely worked. The speaker crackled as tape 1 began. Static. Heavy breathing. Then a man's voice. Calm. Professional. If you're listening to this. Long pause. They didn't tell you everything either. I leaned closer. My name isn't important anymore. Another pause. If you're Keeper 23. More static. You're already dead. The recording clicked off. End of tape. Only 38 seconds long. I stared at the machine. There should have been more. The cassette was 60 minutes. I rewound it. Nothing. Just those 38 seconds. The rest was blank. Or erased. Sunset came faster than I expected. The fog returned almost immediately. Not drifting. Growing. Like frost spreading across glass. Only this frost moved uphill. Against gravity. Toward the lighthouse. Toward me. The temperature dropped nearly 15 degrees in less than 10 minutes. My weather instruments confirmed it. Pressure remained normal. Humidity remained normal. Everything said clear conditions. Everything except my eyes. Outside. The fog had already swallowed the inland trees. At exactly 7:48 p.m. the lighthouse horn sounded. One long blast. It echoed across the water. 5 seconds later. Another horn answered. From inland. Lower. Older. Not mechanical. It sounded organic. As if something enormous had learned how to imitate brass and air. My radio exploded with static. Every frequency activated simultaneously. Voices. Hundreds of them. Talking over one another. Some crying. Some laughing. Some whispering. One repeating coordinates. Another reading weather reports from decades ago. Children counting. Someone praying. Someone screaming. Then, through all the overlapping voices, one sentence emerged with perfect clarity. The lights disappeared before I could count them. One sweep of the beam. Hundreds of pale points staring back from the fog. The next sweep. Nothing. Just white mist swallowing the center of the island. I kept telling myself they had to be reflections. Moisture. Quartz. Some weird atmospheric effect. but my hands were shaking too hard to convince the rest of me. I grabbed the binoculars again. The fog looked empty. No lights. No figures. No movement. Then one of the weather monitors inside the lantern room chimed. Motion detected. That didn't make sense. The station only had 4 motion sensors. One covered the fuel shed. One covered the maintenance house. One watched the dock. The 4th covered the inland trail. A trail I hadn't even known existed. I hurried downstairs 2 steps at a time and unlocked the equipment room. Mounted on the wall was a bank of old security monitors. Most displayed static. One showed the dock. Empty. Another showed the generator shed. Nothing. The final screen flickered before settling into grainy black and white footage. A narrow gravel path wound toward the island's center. A weathered sign stood beside it. I couldn't make out the words. The timestamp read 8:02 p.m. Current time was 8:14 p.m. The camera was 12 minutes behind. I checked the recorder. It wasn't malfunctioning. The feed was intentionally delayed. Why would anyone delay a security camera? As I leaned closer, a man walked into frame. He wore the same government-issued rain jacket I had hanging in my closet. He stopped beside the sign, turned toward the camera. Even through the static, I recognized my own face. My breath caught. The man, looked exhausted. Older. His beard was longer than mine. His jacket was torn across one shoulder. He stared directly into the camera for several seconds before raising one hand. He held up 4 fingers. Then he pointed toward the trees. The delayed feed dissolved into static. I looked instinctively toward the window. The real trail outside was empty. No one stood there. No movement. Just fog. The monitor refreshed. Now the timestamp matched the current time. The trail remained deserted. I replayed the recording. There wasn't one. The system insisted no motion event had occurred. Sleep wasn't an option anymore. Instead, I began cataloging everything that had happened since arriving. The voice outside. The impossible rules. The second horn. The blinking lights. The delayed camera. The man with my face. As I wrote, a pattern emerged. Every strange event happened after the lighthouse beam swept inland. The beam wasn't revealing the anomaly. It was interacting with it. That thought sat in my stomach like a stone. Because if the light was doing something, then every rotation was making the situation worse. The next morning, I climbed down to inspect the inland trail. In daylight, it looked almost disappointingly normal. Crushed gravel. Wooden posts. Maintenance markers. The sign I'd seen on the monitor stood exactly where I'd expected. Its lettering had almost completely faded. I brushed away years of salt and dirt. Only a few words remained legible. Authorized personnel only. Below that, barely visible. Observation Zone A. There was no agency name. No logo. Nothing to indicate who had built it. The trail itself disappeared into the twisted pines where the fog lingered even under a bright blue sky. Not thick. Just present. Like the island refused to let that patch of air clear. I took 3 steps onto the trail. My radio crackled instantly. Ethan. The voice was the same woman from headquarters. Sharp. Urgent. You've entered a restricted area. I froze. How do you know where I am? Return to the lighthouse. Are you tracking me? No response. Instead, leave the trail. I looked around. There were no cameras. No drones. No towers. Nothing that should have allowed anyone to know my exact location. Who's watching me? Static. Then the transmission ended. I backed off the trail. The radio remained silent. Back inside, curiosity finally overpowered caution. I decided to inspect every inch of the lighthouse itself. The original structure dated back to the late 19th century, but countless renovations had buried the old stone beneath reinforced steel and concrete. The blueprints in the office showed 4 levels. Basement. Ground floor. Living quarters. Lantern room. Simple. Except the measurements didn't add up. The exterior height measured 118 feet. The interior stairwell accounted for only 105. 13 feet were missing. Architecturally impossible. I measured twice. Same result. Somewhere inside the tower, there was an entire floor that officially didn't exist. Finding it took almost 3 hours. One section of the basement wall sounded hollow. Behind a shelving unit bolted to the floor, I found a narrow steel door painted the same color as the concrete. No label. No handle. Just a brass keyhole. I reached into my pocket. The brass key. The one my predecessor had handed me without explanation. It fit perfectly. For several seconds, I simply stared at the lock. Every horror movie I'd ever laughed at flashed through my head. Don't open mysterious doors. Don't investigate strange noises. Don't ignore obvious warnings. Then I remembered the words in the maintenance log. Asterisk. You'll need this. Asterisk. I turned the key. The lock clicked. A heavy hydraulic seal released with a long metallic sigh. Cold air rolled out. Not damp. Not moldy. Cold. Dry. Conditioned. Someone was maintaining whatever lay beyond. I expected an old storage room. Instead, a concrete staircase descended into darkness. Modern LED lights flickered on automatically as I stepped inside. The walls looked military. Smooth poured concrete. Glass doors. Fiber optic cable. Ventilation ducts. This wasn't part of a lighthouse. It was a bunker. The staircase ended in a narrow corridor lined with numbered doors. Lab A. Archive. Communications. Medical. Power. Every room had been abandoned in a hurry. Coffee mugs still sat on desks. Computer monitors remained plugged in. Clipboards lay scattered across the floor. Yet every hard drive had been removed. Every filing cabinet emptied. Anything containing actual information was gone. Except one wall-mounted display still had power. Across the cracked monitor scrolled a repeating warning. Site 14 evacuation complete. Do not extinguish primary beacon. Visual contact prohibited. Level Omega containment active. The message repeated every 30 seconds. No date. No agency. No explanation. I searched the room for another hour. Nothing. Then I found the conference room. On the whiteboard someone had written one sentence so hard the marker had gouged the surface beneath. IT isn't coming here. Below it. It has always been here. A metallic clang echoed somewhere deeper underground. One sharp impact. Then another. Like someone striking a steel pipe. 3 knocks. Exactly the same rhythm as the front door. I listened. Silence. Then 3 more knocks. Closer. They weren't coming through the walls. They were coming through the ventilation system. Something was moving inside the ducts. Slowly. Patiently. Following the sound of my breathing. I backed into the hallway. The knocking followed. Always from the nearest vent. Never fast. Never frantic. Just enough to let me know it knew where I was. I hurried toward the staircase. The knocking sped up. Not by much. Just enough to keep pace with me. I reached the blast door. Pulled it shut. Turned the wheel until the locking bolts engaged. The knocking stopped instantly. I stood there listening to my own heartbeat. Then I noticed something scratched into the inside of the blast door. Tiny letters. Easy to miss. Written by someone with a screwdriver. If you hear knocking below. The rest had been scratched away. Not worn away. Deliberately destroyed. That night I couldn't stop thinking about the bunker. Headquarters had never mentioned it. The maps omitted it. The previous keeper had hidden the key in plain sight. Someone wanted the bunker forgotten. Someone else wanted it found. Those couldn't both be accidents. At exactly 9 p.m., the encrypted radio activated by itself. Not static this time. A clean signal. A man's voice. Calm. Authoritative. This is Containment Site 14. Evening status report. Silence. Then another voice answered. Beacon operational. A third voice. Observation teams accounted for. A fourth. Fog boundary stable. The exchange continued as if dozens of people were still working beneath the island. I checked the bunker. It was empty. The recording on the radio continued. Personnel count? A pause. Then, 24. Another pause. Correction. Longer silence. 25. Every muscle in my body locked. According to every record I'd found, there had only ever been 24 keepers. The radio hissed softly. Then a final voice spoke. Quiet. Almost curious. Who is the 25th? The transmission cut off. At that exact moment, every light in the lighthouse went dark. The beam stopped turning. The horn fell silent. For the first time since I arrived, the lighthouse went completely blind. And somewhere beyond the windows, something enormous exhaled. Darkness hit like a physical blow. Not the ordinary kind. I've worked enough overnight jobs to know what true darkness looks like. You wait a few seconds, your eyes adjust, and shapes begin to emerge. This wasn't that. The darkness inside Gull Point Lighthouse felt occupied. Like the light hadn't gone out. Something else had moved in to replace it. For 2 or 3 seconds I couldn't even hear the ocean. The waves were simply gone. Then the emergency batteries kicked in. Red lights flickered along the walls. Not bright enough to illuminate the rooms. Just enough to paint everything in the color of dried blood. The generator alarm erupted downstairs. I grabbed my flashlight and sprinted toward the basement. Halfway down the stairs, the lighthouse horn blasted. One deafening note. Impossible. The main power was dead. The horn required electricity. Yet it sounded louder than it ever had before. The blast didn't come from above me. It came from underneath. From somewhere below the bunker. The generator room should have smelled like diesel. Instead, it smelled like wet soil. Freshly turned earth. The backup generator sat exactly where it belonged. Every gauge read normal. Fuel pressure. Oil pressure. Voltage. Perfect. The engine wasn't running. It couldn't have been. The flywheel wasn't moving. Yet every instrument insisted it was producing full power. I reached toward the control panel. The metal casing vibrated beneath my fingertips. Something was spinning. Just not the engine. Then the vibration stopped. Every gauge instantly fell to 0. The emergency lights flickered once. The main power returned. The lighthouse beam resumed its slow rotation as if nothing had happened. The outage had lasted less than 90 seconds. But 90 seconds was enough. Outside, the fog had moved. Before the blackout, it had remained nearly a quarter mile inland. Now it rested just beyond the generator shed. It had advanced almost 300 yards. No wind. No weather front. Just closer. Almost like darkness had allowed it to breathe. Headquarters called before I could. Ethan. The woman's voice sounded strained for the first time. Confirm beacon restoration. It's back online. Duration? About 90 seconds. Silence. Then someone whispered in the background. Not into the microphone. Near it. He counted. The woman muted the transmission. I could still hear muffled arguing. Another voice. Male. We told them not to send one alone. The microphone clicked back on. Did you hear anything during the outage? What am I supposed to hear? Another pause. Answer the question. I heard the horn. No. Her response came immediately. I asked if you heard anything. I just told you. The horn doesn't count. My pulse quickened. What doesn't count? She ignored me. Did you hear footsteps? No. Children? No. Your own voice? No. What about breathing? I hesitated. Maybe. The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Finally she spoke. Mr. Mercer. Her voice had lost all professionalism. Do not lose sight of your own shadow tonight. The transmission ended. I looked down instinctively. Morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows. My shadow stretched across the wooden floor. Perfectly ordinary. Except, it wasn't following me exactly. I took one step. It moved with me. Almost. There was the slightest delay. Barely noticeable. Maybe a fraction of a second. I stopped. My shadow took one more step. Then froze. I stared at it. It stared back. No. That isn't right. Shadows don't stare. But somehow. I knew it was. I spent the next hour trying to prove I'd imagined it. Different rooms. Different lighting. Flashlight. Lantern. Nothing unusual. Every shadow behaved normally. Eventually I convinced myself stress was affecting my perception. Then I walked outside. The afternoon sun sat high overhead. My shadow stretched behind me across the gravel. I deliberately stopped. It stopped too. I laughed. See? Normal. Then I started walking again. Out of the corner of my eye. My shadow didn't. For one impossible heartbeat. It remained standing where I'd been. Then snapped back beneath my feet. I refused to look behind me after that. Around 4 in the afternoon, the weather station transmitted an automatic anomaly report. Temperature. Pressure. Humidity. Wind speed. All normal. One additional line appeared beneath the data. Unauthorized thermal mass detected. Coordinates. Island interior. Distance. 0.8 miles. Estimated size. Unavailable. Heat signature. Negative. Negative. I'd never seen that parameter before. Heat signatures don't become negative. Objects can be cold. They can emit less than 0 environmental energy. I rebooted the system. The alert vanished. 30 seconds later. It returned. Only now the distance read 0.7 miles. Moving toward the lighthouse. Walking speed. I called headquarters. No answer. I tried the emergency frequency. Nothing. Military frequency. Static. Coast Guard. Silence. Every channel had gone dead. Except one. An old maritime distress band crackled softly. A terrified man's voice broke through. If anyone hears this. Heavy breathing. Don't answer the fog. Another voice interrupted him. Much calmer. Michael. No. You've been missing for 3 days. I'm not missing. You are. I'm still on the island. Long pause. Then the calm voice answered. No. Almost sympathetically. You're underneath it. The transmission dissolved into screaming. Then silence. I dug through every personnel record I could find. There was no Michael. Not among lighthouse keepers. Not maintenance crews. Not researchers. Not military staff. Nothing. The distress call belonged to someone who officially never existed. That evening I decided to inspect the shoreline. Not because I thought it would help. Because I needed proof that reality still made sense somewhere. The eastern cliffs overlooked open ocean. The water remained calm. The horizon perfectly clear. No fog. No storms. Just endless Atlantic blue. I almost relaxed. Then I noticed something impossible. A ship. Far offshore. Motionless. No navigation lights. No wake. Through my binoculars I made out its silhouette. Old. Steel hull. Military gray. No visible name. No flag. No crew on deck. It simply floated. Watching the lighthouse. I lowered the binoculars. The ship disappeared. I raised them again. It was back. Lowered them. Gone. Raised them. Still there. only visible through magnification. Like it existed at a different distance than everything around it. A horn sounded from the vessel. Deep. Ancient. The inland horn answered immediately. The two calls overlapped. One from the sea. One from the island. For several seconds they harmonized into something almost musical. Every window in the lighthouse rattled. Every radio switched on. Every clock inside the building stopped at exactly 6:13 p.m. Even my wristwatch froze. The second hand refused to move. Outside, the ocean stopped. The waves hung in place against the rocks. Foam suspended in midair. Spray frozen like glass. The wind vanished. The clouds stopped drifting. For perhaps 10 seconds, time itself seemed to hold its breath. Only one thing continued moving. The fog. It flowed inland. Toward me. When the clock started again, it was 6:14. 1 minute had passed. My watch insisted only 1 second had. That night I finally listened to tape 2. The voice sounded weaker than before. More exhausted. If you're hearing this. Coughing. I've figured out why they rotate keepers. More coughing. They tell us it's psychological fatigue. A dry laugh. That's a lie. Paper rustled somewhere near the recorder. The island doesn't kill people. Long pause. It edits them. I stopped the tape. Rewound. Played it again. Same sentence. The island doesn't kill people. Asterisk, it edits them. Asterisk. The recording continued. You'll start noticing missing memories. Another pause. They begin with small things. What you had for breakfast. A conversation. A face. You'll think you're tired. You aren't. It's making room. The tape ended. Blank. Exactly like the first one. I tried to remember what I'd eaten that morning. Nothing came. Coffee. I remembered making coffee. Had I eaten? Toast? Eggs? Nothing. I checked the sink. One dirty coffee mug. One plate. Crumbs. So I'd eaten something. I couldn't remember what. That shouldn't have frightened me. But it did. Because I couldn't remember washing the plate either. Or making the coffee. Only holding the mug. Everything before that. Gone. At 11:47 p.m., the motion sensor alarm activated again. This time every camera came online automatically. The dock. Empty. Generator shed. Empty. Maintenance house. Empty. Inland trail. Occupied. 24 people stood in a perfectly straight line across the path. Men. Women. Different ages. Different uniforms spanning decades. Every one of them stared directly into the camera. None of them moved. I recognized the gray-bearded keeper who had handed me the brass key. He stood in the center. Beside him was a younger man in a lighthouse uniform from the 1970s. Next to him, someone wearing military fatigues. Another in a lab coat. One in Coast Guard orange. 24 faces. 24 missing keepers. Then, as one, they all raised a finger. Not toward the camera. Towards something standing behind it. The screen filled with static. One final frame appeared before the feed died. A silhouette. Tall enough that its head extended beyond the top of the camera's view. Standing only a few feet behind the lens. Looking directly toward the lighthouse. Toward me. Then every exterior camera shut off permanently. At that exact moment, 3 slow knocks echoed from somewhere inside the tower. Not the front door. Not the bunker. Above me. From the lantern room. The room I'd locked. 20 minutes earlier. The first knock sounded like wood against metal. Slow. Measured. Deliberate. The second came 7 or 8 seconds later. The third. Directly overhead. I stared at the ceiling. The lantern room was 4 flights above me. I'd locked it before coming downstairs. I still had the only key in my pocket. There shouldn't have been anyone up there. There shouldn't have been anything up there. Then the lighthouse beam swept across the kitchen window. For half a second, the shadow of someone crossed the glass. Inside the lantern room, a human silhouette, standing where I had been standing less than an hour earlier. The light completed its rotation. The silhouette vanished. I was already moving, my flashlight in one hand, service pistol in the other. I took the stairs 2 at a time. The knocking didn't repeat. Instead, I heard footsteps. Heavy. Slow. Circling the lantern room above me. Not pacing nervously. Walking with purpose. Like someone inspecting the windows. Waiting. By the time I reached the final landing, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The lantern room door remained exactly as I'd left it. Locked. No signs of forced entry. No scratches. No broken glass. I slid the brass key into the lock. For a long moment I hesitated. Then I opened the door. The room was empty. Or so I thought. The beacon rotated quietly. The Fresnel lens gleamed under the lamp. Every window looked out over black ocean and darker land. Nothing unusual. Then I noticed something on the floor. Wet footprints. Bare feet. They circled the entire lantern room. One complete loop. 32 footprints. Perfectly spaced. They began at the door, walked clockwise, and ended at the center of the room. There were no returning prints. Whoever had made them had simply stopped existing in the middle of the floor. I knelt beside the nearest print. It wasn't water. It smelled faintly sweet. The same smell I'd noticed drifting in from inland. Rotting flowers. And iron. I photographed every footprint. Measured them. Compared them to my own boots. The feet were larger than mine. Long toes. Oddly narrow heel. Human. Almost. As I stood back up, the lighthouse beam completed another rotation. It swept inland. The room suddenly became 10 degrees colder. The glass windows fogged instantly. Not from the outside. From the inside. Moisture spread across every pane. Lines began appearing in the condensation. At first I thought they were random streaks. Then they formed letters. Someone was writing. No finger. No hand. Just invisible pressure moving through the moisture. One word. Look! I turned toward the inland windows. The fog below had parted. Not much. Just enough to reveal a clearing I'd never seen before. In the center stood the smaller lighthouse. The one I'd glimpsed through the binoculars. Except now I could see it clearly. It wasn't abandoned. Its beacon was turning. Slowly. Every time my lighthouse completed a rotation. The inland lighthouse answered a few seconds later. 2 beacons. Perfectly synchronized. Except the inland beam wasn't white. It was black. Not the absence of light. A moving column of darkness. As it swept across the trees, stars disappeared behind it. The moon disappeared behind it. The darkness itself illuminated nothing. It erased. I remembered Rule 7. If you see another lighthouse, close your eyes. I slammed mine shut. Too late. Even through my eyelids I could still see the black beam. Like it wasn't light entering my eyes. It was something my mind understood directly. For just an instant, I saw another coastline. Not the Atlantic. Not any ocean I recognized. A sky without stars. An endless white shoreline. Thousands of identical lighthouses stretching beyond the horizon. Every one shining darkness into an equally endless fog. Then it was gone. I opened my eyes, gasping. The inland lighthouse had vanished. Only the ordinary fog remained. But I knew I'd seen something real. Not because of the vision. Because my nose had started bleeding. The next morning, I found blood on my pillow. Not much. Just enough to stain the fabric. I also found dirt beneath my fingernails. Dark gray soil. The kind found near the inland trail. I had no memory of leaving the house. The front door remained locked from the inside. Every window was secured. The motion sensors recorded nothing overnight. Yet my boots sat beside the bed, covered in fresh mud. I checked the soles. Embedded between the treads was a tiny fragment of white paint. Marine-grade paint. The same paint used on lighthouse exteriors. But I'd never climbed the outside of the tower. I hadn't even been near another structure. Unless the second lighthouse had been real. No. That was impossible. Hadn't it? At breakfast I decided to test my memory. I wrote 3 words on a sticky note. Key. Window. Harbor. Asterisk asterisk. I folded it and put it in my shirt pocket. Every hour I'd check whether I still remembered them before unfolding the paper. 9 o'clock. All 3. 10 o'clock. Still remembered. 11. I hesitated. Was it harbor? Or harbor, something? I unfolded the note. Just harbor. Fine. No problem. Noon. I remembered only key. The other 2 were gone. Not fuzzy. Gone. As though I'd never written them. I stared at the note for nearly a minute before panic finally caught up with me. The tape had been right. The island wasn't just taking memories. It was choosing which ones. That afternoon I searched the bunker again. This time I ventured deeper. Past communications. Past medical. Past archive. A section of the facility had been sealed behind another blast door. Unlike the first, this one had no keyhole. Only a biometric scanner. Dead. Or so I assumed. When I placed my hand on it, the scanner lit up. A soft green glow swept across my palm. Identity confirmed. My blood ran cold. I'd never been here before. How could the system recognize me? The heavy door unlocked with a hydraulic hiss. A single sentence echoed through hidden speakers. Welcome back, Dr. Mercer. I stood frozen. Dr. Mercer? I wasn't a doctor. I'd never been a doctor. The voice continued. Containment briefing available upon request. No, I whispered. You've got the wrong person. No response. Only the soft hum of air handlers somewhere below. The room beyond looked nothing like the rest of the bunker. It resembled an observation theater. Tiered seating. Banks of dead monitors. A massive reinforced glass window overlooking. Nothing. Just thick white fog filling an enormous underground chamber. The chamber was impossible. It had to be hundreds of feet across. Far larger than the island itself. The geometry didn't make sense. The island above couldn't physically contain a space this large. Yet there it was. Buried beneath Gull Point. At the base of the glass stood a rusted brass plaque. Only one line remained readable. Observation well. There was no mention of what was being observed. The monitors suddenly flickered to life. Not all of them. Just one. A grainy recording began playing automatically. Date stamp. October 14th, 1998. The footage showed scientists standing behind the same glass. Military officers. Technicians. One man stepped into view. He wore a white lab coat. Dark hair. Mid-30s. He turned toward the camera. My stomach lurched. He had my face. Not similar. Identical. 20 years younger. He smiled tiredly. If this recording activates. He glanced toward the fog beyond the glass. Containment has failed again. Again. Not for the first time. Again. My name is Dr. Ethan Mercer. I whispered. No. He continued. If you're seeing me, then it has already started replacing your memories with mine. He looked directly into the camera. As of this recording, I have volunteered to remain inside observation site 14. He stopped speaking. His expression changed. Almost sympathetic. I'm sorry. For both of us. The recording ended. The monitor went black. I stumbled backward until I hit the wall. I knew my birthday. My childhood. My military contractor jobs. My divorce. My entire life. Didn't I? Or were those memories simply newer? Outside the observation window, something moved inside the fog. Slowly. An outline. Far too large to be human. It approached the glass. Not quickly. Curiously. As if it had heard the recording too. A shape the size of a building paused only a few feet from the reinforced window. I couldn't see details. Only absence. Like reality refused to describe it. Then it leaned closer. A single enormous eye opened within the fog. Not glowing. Not monstrous. Just impossibly old. It looked at me. Not with hunger. Recognition. As though it had been waiting for me to remember who I really was. Then, somewhere behind me, the bunker intercom crackled. A calm female voice, the same one from headquarters, spoke a sentence that made every impossible thing I'd experienced suddenly seem much smaller. Dr. Mercer. The woman's voice echoed through the bunker speakers with perfect clarity. It's awake because you came back. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My eyes were still locked on the observation window. The enormous eye beyond the glass hadn't blinked. It hadn't moved. It simply watched. Waiting. The silence stretched so long that I started to believe it wasn't looking at me anymore. Then the pupil shifted. Just slightly. Following me as I took a single step backward. Every instinct I had screamed the same thing. Don't turn your back on it. I reached for the intercom microphone mounted beside the blast door. My name is Ethan Mercer. You know that isn't true anymore. I've never been here. You have. No. Another pause. Then the woman sighed. Not impatiently. Sadly. We've had this conversation before. My stomach tightened. What did you say? This is your 7th orientation. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was impossible. 7? Yes. I arrived 4 days ago. No. You arrived 7 times. No. The previous 6 concluded unsuccessfully. I would have remembered. You weren't supposed to. Silence filled the room again. Finally, I forced myself to ask the question I already dreaded. What happened to the other 6? The answer came so quietly I almost missed it. You buried them. I stumbled away from the intercom. No. You asked us to erase each attempt? Stop. You believed memory loss would slow the adaptation. I said stop. It didn't. The speakers clicked off. The bunker became silent again. Except, it wasn't silent. Someone was breathing behind me. Not close. Farther back in the observation theater. I turned slowly. Empty seats. Dust. Darkness. The breathing stopped. I left the observation chamber immediately. Not running. Running gets people killed. I checked every hallway. Every doorway. Nothing. Yet I kept hearing footsteps. Always one corridor behind. Never closer. Never farther away. When I stopped. They stopped. When I continued. They continued. Exactly one pace behind mine. Halfway back to the surface I noticed something new. The hallway walls. They weren't concrete anymore. Or rather, they still looked like concrete. Until I touched them. Warm. Slightly soft. Almost elastic. I jerked my hand away. The wall slowly returned to its original shape. As if it had inhaled beneath my fingertips. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered. A low vibration rolled through the bunker. Not mechanical. Biological. The building itself seemed to breathe. By the time I reached the surface, it was nearly sunset. I slammed the blast door shut behind me. This time I spun the locking wheel until my hands hurt. Then I wedged a steel maintenance bar through the mechanism. I didn't care if it was overkill. I wasn't going back down there. Not tonight. Maybe never. The lighthouse radio activated on its own. Not the encrypted channel. A standard Coast Guard frequency. Gold Point, report status. The voice sounded ordinary. Professional. Human. I nearly cried with relief. This is Mercer. I need immediate evacuation. State emergency. I started talking so fast I tripped over my own words. There's an underground facility, missing personnel, impossible weather, someone thinks I'm. Copy. The operator interrupted calmly. Have you entered observation well? I froze. Yes. Did it establish eye contact? My mouth went dry. Yes. A long silence. Then paper rustling. The operator spoke as though reading from a checklist. Memory degradation estimate? I don't know. Identity instability? What? Mr. Mercer. His voice remained perfectly calm. Do you currently possess childhood memories? Yes. Are they continuous? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Continuous? I remembered Christmas mornings. Little League. Learning to drive. College. But the spaces between them. How had I never noticed? Entire years existed only as isolated snapshots. Like photographs without the days connecting them. The operator waited. Finally I answered. I don't know. I understand. He sounded almost compassionate. Please remain calm. Can you get me off this island? No. Why not? Because you left 41 years ago. The transmission ended. I stared at the silent radio. 41 years. That would make me. No. That couldn't be right. I was 36. Wasn't I? I hurried into the bathroom. The mirror reflected exactly what I'd always seen. Brown hair. A few gray strands. Tired eyes. 30-something. Perfectly normal. Then the lights flickered. For one heartbeat. The reflection changed. The man staring back looked nearly 80. Thin. Sunken eyes. Deep wrinkles. His skin looked almost translucent. He smiled. I didn't. The lights stabilized. My normal reflection returned. Except, there was a wet handprint on the mirror. On the inside. That night I finally listened to tape 3. The recorder hissed for several seconds before the familiar voice returned. If you've reached this tape. Heavy breathing. You've already seen the well. A chair scraped across concrete. I need you to understand something before your memories start changing. Long pause. They didn't discover the anomaly. They built around it. Paper rustled. The first lighthouse wasn't constructed to warn ships. Another pause. It was built to keep something from navigating. My pulse quickened. The tape continued. The beam isn't a signal. It's a lock. Another cough. And every rotation. Silence. Hurts it? The recording stopped. Blank. Again. Only a few minutes preserved. Everything else erased. The lighthouse beam. A lock. Not a warning. Containment. Every 32 seconds. The island was doing something to whatever existed beneath it. Then another thought hit me. If the beam was a lock, why did the thing want it extinguished? Because it couldn't leave while the light turned. Or because the light kept us from seeing where we really were. Around midnight the horn sounded again. One blast from the lighthouse. One answer from inland. Then another. Then another. The pattern didn't stop. The horns began speaking. Not randomly. Rhythmically. Almost. Conversationally. Long. Short. Long. 3 quick. 2 slow. Back and forth. I grabbed an old signal manual from the communications cabinet. Morse code. I translated as fast as I could. The lighthouse. Status. The inland horn answered. Open. Lighthouse. Denied. Inland. Open. Lighthouse. Denied. Then the inland horn repeated one word over and over. Home. 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 The final blast shook the windows hard enough to crack one pane. The conversation ended. The crack in the glass spread slowly across the lantern room window. Not outward. Inward. Like pressure from inside the room was forcing the glass apart. White fog seeped through the fracture. Just a thin ribbon. It didn't drift. It crawled. Like smoke moving underwater. The fog reached the floor. Stopped. Then began gathering itself. Condensing. Growing taller. Limbs emerged first. Then shoulders. Then a head. A human figure formed from nothing but white vapor. It looked directly at me. My face. Again. Only older. This version wore a weathered lighthouse uniform stained with salt. He looked exhausted. Terrified. He raised one shaking finger to his lips. "Don't let it hear you." His voice barely rose above a whisper. I stepped toward him. "What are you?" He ignored the question. "It learns from conversations." "What learns?" "You've already told it too much." My pulse hammered. "Who are you?" He looked genuinely confused. "I'm..." He frowned. For several seconds he couldn't answer. Then his expression collapsed. "I don't remember." His own answer frightened him. He looked down at his hands as though seeing them for the first time. "It's taking me." His body began dissolving. Not fading. Unraveling. The fog peeled away from him in strips. He reached toward me desperately. "Ethan." His voice cracked. "If you find the original logbook..." Another piece of him vanished. "Don't read." The rest disappeared. Only fog remained. The room fell silent. On the floor where he'd stood lay a small leather notebook. Dry. Real. Not made of fog. I picked it up with trembling hands. The cover bore no title. Only an embossed government seal that had been scratched almost completely away. Inside the front cover, written in faded ink, was a single sentence. I opened the notebook with both hands. The leather felt warm. Not from my body heat. Warm as if someone had been holding it only moments before. The first page wasn't dated. It wasn't even numbered. It contained a list of names. 24 of them. Some I'd already seen in the maintenance logs. Daniel Rowe. Helen Brooks. Samuel Ortiz. Robert Gaines. The gray-bearded keeper who had handed me the brass key. Each name had a single word written beside it. Remembered. My own name appeared at the bottom. Ethan Mercer. Unlike the others, there was no word beside it. Just a blank line. I turned the page. The handwriting was unmistakably mine. Not similar. Mine. Same slant. Same habit of crossing my sevens. Same uneven pressure where I held the pen too tightly. The date at the top stopped me cold. September 18th, 1985. I wasn't even born in 1985. The entry began. If you're reading this again, then the reset failed. I sat down on the floor of the lantern room. The beam continued its slow rotation overhead. Outside, the inland fog waited just beyond the rocks. I kept reading. You won't believe this at first. I never do. You will insist you're 36. You will remember weather stations, a divorce, and a government contract. Those memories are real. They're just not your first ones. My throat tightened. The notebook anticipated every objection forming in my mind. We learn too late that it doesn't erase identities. It layers them. Every time containment weakens, it gives you another life. The old one sinks beneath it. Eventually you stop noticing the seams. I looked up from the page. The lighthouse walls suddenly felt much older than they had an hour earlier. As though I'd stopped seeing them the way they really were. The next entry described the island. Not as a lighthouse station. As an observation site. Construction had begun decades before the lighthouse existed. Surveyors had reported persistent inland luminescence that couldn't be explained by weather, geology, or astronomy. The earliest expedition entered the fog expecting marsh gas. Only 2 people returned. Neither recognized their own names. Both claimed the ocean had been on the opposite side of the island. Either survived the week. The project should have been abandoned. Instead, someone decided to build. Not to investigate. To contain. Another section had been underlined so heavily the ink had nearly cut through the paper. The fog is not the anomaly. Below it, it is the boundary. Another line. Everything outside the fog belongs to our world. Then, everything inside belongs to something that learned how to imitate ours. I closed the notebook. Not because I didn't want to know more. Because I suddenly understood why every explanation had raised two more questions. The fog wasn't spreading. The boundary was moving. A low hum filled the lantern room. Not mechanical. Harmonic. Like hundreds of distant voices holding the same note. The lighthouse beam slowed. Not much. Just enough for me to notice. One rotation. 33 seconds. Then 34. I checked the control panel. Everything read normal. Yet the lens continued slowing. Whatever powered the beacon wasn't failing. Something was resisting it. The radio came alive. Not with static. With a recording. A man's voice. Calm. Measured. This message is for Dr. Mercer. I didn't touch the handset. If this transmission has begun, then the lighthouse has fallen below operational tolerance. A pause. You must not attempt to restore full output. That contradicted everything. Every instruction I'd been given. The recording continued. If the beacon reaches maximum intensity, the boundary will fail. I frowned. Tape 3 had said the beam was a lock. Now this recording claimed increasing its power would break containment. Unless both were true. If the mechanism had been damaged over decades, forcing it harder might destroy it entirely. The lighthouse shuddered. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Another vibration rolled through the stone. This one lasted nearly 10 seconds. Then came a sound I hadn't heard before. A bell. Not the lighthouse bell. Dozens of bells. All ringing somewhere deep beneath the island. Slow. Uneven. As if an entire city underground had begun tolling at once. The notebook slipped from my lap. It fell open to a page I hadn't reached. There was only one sentence. Written in hurried block letters. Never look down when the bells begin. Instinctively, I looked toward the floor. The old wooden planks had changed. They weren't planks anymore. Not completely. Hairline cracks spread between them. Thin ribbons of white fog drifted upward through the gaps. For a split second, I thought I saw movement far below. Not the bunker. Farther. An impossible depth beneath the island. Like standing over a shaft that descended forever. Then the floor looked normal again. Someone knocked. Not on the front door. Not in the bunker. 3 soft knocks came from the inside of the lantern room door. I stared at it. I hadn't heard anyone climb the stairs. Ethan. The voice belonged to the gray-bearded keeper. The one who had left on the ferry. I know you're there. I didn't answer. I've remembered something. Silence. I think you'll want to hear it. I stepped closer but kept my hand away from the handle. What is it? A long pause. Then, quietly. I never got on the ferry. The hallway outside fell silent again. No footsteps. No breathing. Nothing. I waited nearly a minute before opening the door. The spiral staircase was empty. Except for wet footprints leading downward. Bare footprints. The same long, narrow prints I'd found circling the lantern room. This time they weren't alone. A second set climbed upward. Boot prints. Government issued. Exactly my size. They met on the landing halfway down. Circled one another once. Then, only one set continued back up. I couldn't tell which. The boot prints stopped at the threshold of the lantern room. The bare footprints did not. They simply ended. Not faded. Not turned away. Ended as though whoever had made them had stepped out of existence. I crouched and ran my flashlight over the floor. The moisture shimmered faintly in the beam. It wasn't water. It was the same pale residue I'd found before, sweet-smelling, almost luminous, leaving no texture on my fingertips. I looked back toward the staircase. My own boot prints were mixed in now. For a moment, I couldn't remember which ones were fresh. I closed the lantern room door and slid the bolt into place. Then I locked it. Then I leaned a steel wrench against the handle. It wouldn't stop anyone determined to get in. But it made me feel like I was still making choices. That mattered. Or at least I hoped it did. The notebook lay open where I'd dropped it. A folded sheet of paper slipped out from between 2 pages. I hadn't noticed it before. It was older than the notebook itself. The paper had yellowed with age. Across the top, stamped in faded black ink, Project Beacon. Below it, a sentence had been typed on a manual typewriter. Containment assumptions remain incorrect. The entity has never attempted to leave Observation Zone 14. ***. I frowned. Every briefing. Every warning. Every rule. Everything implied the thing beneath the island wanted to escape. The next line destroyed that assumption. All recorded expansion events have originated from our side of the boundary. I read it again. Then a third time. The fog hadn't been invading our world. We had been entering its. I spread the old map, the maintenance logs, and the notebook across the table. For the first time since arriving, the pieces started fitting together. Not perfectly, but enough. The lighthouse hadn't been built on an island because the anomaly was here. The island had become what it was because someone chose this place to build the lighthouse. Generation after generation. New keepers. New researchers. New equipment. Every expansion. Every bunker. Every cable. Every experiment. Human beings kept pushing farther beneath the island. Farther into whatever lay below. The fog's growth wasn't an attack. It was a reaction. A shoreline receding before an incoming tide. The radio clicked. No static. Just breathing. Then the woman from headquarters. Ethan. I know. My own voice surprised me. It sounded calmer than I felt. You've been lying to me. Yes. You aren't containing it. No. What are you doing? Silence. Long enough that I thought she'd disconnected. Finally. We're containing us. Every muscle in my body tightened. What does that mean? It remembers every person who enters the boundary. I've seen the names. No. She spoke gently. You've seen the ones that let you remember. The connection crackled. Another voice entered the transmission. An older man. Confident. Military. Mr. Mercer. Who is this? I authorized your reassignment. I never volunteered. You did. I would have remembered. Exactly. Paper shuffled somewhere on his end. We've reached the point where disclosure is no longer operationally significant. Then disclose. He inhaled slowly. The lighthouse has never protected the mainland. My pulse quickened. It protects the people working here. I looked instinctively toward the inland fog. What from? His answer came immediately. The truth. The line went dead. I couldn't stay inside anymore. Not with the notebook. Not with the questions. I took a lantern instead of a flashlight. For reasons I couldn't explain, I no longer trusted electric light. The night air was unnaturally still. Even the ocean seemed quieter. The fog had stopped advancing. It rested at the edge of the inland trail. Waiting. The sign marked Observation Zone A creaked softly in the wind. Except, there wasn't any wind. I stepped onto the gravel path. Nothing happened. No radio. No alarm. No warning. One step. Then another. The fog remained perfectly still, as if inviting me closer. I stopped a few yards from its edge. The smell of wet earth filled the air. Not unpleasant. Almost familiar. Like the woods behind my grandparents' house when I was a child. That memory stopped me. Grandparents? I could picture the porch. The swing. The old oak tree. But I couldn't remember their faces. The memory dissolved before I could grasp it. Something was editing me again. A shape emerged from the mist. Not suddenly. Gradually. A man. Gray beard. Government rain jacket. The former keeper. He looked more solid than he'd ever appeared before. He raised both empty hands. I don't have much time. His voice trembled. You can hear me now because it isn't listening. What isn't? He glanced nervously into the fog. It. Tell me what it is. I can't. Why? Every description changes it. He looked genuinely terrified. Names help it. He reached into his jacket. Not for a weapon. For a photograph. He handed it to me. It showed 6 people standing in front of Gull Point Lighthouse. Researchers. Military personnel. Engineers. One face made my blood run cold. I was standing in the middle of the group. Older than I remembered. Wearing a white lab coat. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, Final Expansion Survey, August 12. No year. Just the date. That's impossible. He nodded sadly. I said the same thing. What happened to them? His eyes filled with something close to guilt. We all believed we were the last team. Before I could ask another question, the lighthouse behind me swept its beam across the clearing. The old keeper flinched. His outline blurred. No. He reached toward me. Don't let them relight the second beacon. The what? It's not another lighthouse. The beam struck him. His body unraveled into white strands that drifted silently back into the fog. The photograph remained in my hand. Real. Cold. Heavy. I looked toward the island's center. For the first time. There was no fog. Just an open valley. It hadn't existed before. The terrain stretched far beyond the island's actual size. Rock formations rose like cliffs. A river reflected a pale sky that couldn't possibly fit beneath the one above me. Distance itself seemed wrong. At the center stood the second lighthouse. Only now I realized it wasn't a lighthouse at all. It merely resembled one from a distance. It was a colossal stone tower without windows. Without a lantern. Without a door. Its top disappeared into the white sky overhead. Around its base stood dozens of tiny figures. Watching it. Watching me. Then, one by one, they all turned toward the real lighthouse behind me. Not in anger. Not in fear. In anticipation. As if they knew something inside my lighthouse was about to happen. Behind me, deep within the tower, gears that hadn't moved in decades suddenly began to turn. The sound started deep below my feet. Not the bunker. Lower. Older. A slow, grinding rhythm rolled up through the lighthouse foundation, as if enormous gears buried beneath the island had finally begun turning after decades of silence. The beam overhead faltered. Once. Twice. Then it accelerated. 32 seconds per rotation. 30. 28. The mechanism wasn't supposed to change speed. I knew that better than anyone. Every maintenance log. Every calibration. Every inspection. Its timing was fixed. And yet the light continued sweeping faster across the sea, and across the valley that shouldn't have existed. I looked back toward the impossible stone tower. The white valley was already fading. Fog spilled across it from every direction, swallowing the landscape until only the outline of the tower remained. Then that disappeared too. The island became an island again. Except the gears beneath it kept turning. I ran back inside the lighthouse. The control room was alive with alarms. Every indicator on the main console flashed red. Primary beacon synchronization lost. Rotational overspeed. Containment parameters unknown. Unknown. Not failed. Unknown. That frightened me more. A printer I'd never seen active suddenly came to life beside the console. Page after page spilled onto the floor. Most contained strings of numbers. Coordinates. Dates. Personnel IDs. Then one page emerged with a single sentence centered across it. The observer has returned. Another followed. Begin final protocol. Before I could reach them, the printer jammed. Smoke curled from its housing. Silence returned. The brass key in my pocket grew warm. Not metaphorically. Physically. Hot enough that I pulled it out. Its polished surface had changed. Tiny engraved markings had appeared along the shaft. Concentric circles. They hadn't been there before. Or had I simply never noticed them? The key vibrated once, then pointed downward as it slipped in my grip, like the needle of a compass, toward the bunker, toward whatever lay beneath it. I stood frozen. Every part of me wanted to leave the island, steal the emergency boat, take my chances in the Atlantic. Instead, I found myself walking toward the basement, not because I trusted the place, because every answer I'd found had led underground. If this ended anywhere, it would end there. The blast door stood exactly where I'd left it. Steel bars still wedged through the wheel. Except, the wheel had already turned. The locking bolts had retracted. Someone had opened the door from the inside. I slowly removed the bar. The door drifted inward on its own. The bunker lights were already on. The corridors looked different. Cleaner. Coffee still steamed from mugs I'd previously found cold. Computer monitors displayed active status screens. The smell of fresh paper filled the air. For one impossible moment, the facility wasn't abandoned. It was occupied. Voices echoed somewhere ahead. Conversations. Laughter. Phones ringing. Footsteps. I followed them into the operations room. It was full of people. Scientists. Technicians. Military officers. Nobody reacted to my presence. They walked through me as if I weren't there. Or perhaps, as if I belonged there. A young technician hurried past carrying a clipboard. "Dr. Mercer," he called without slowing. "They're waiting." He disappeared around the corner. Another woman looked up from a console. "You're late." She smiled. Again. I entered the observation theater. The enormous glass window overlooked the white fog exactly as before. Only now dozens of people filled the room. Some taking notes. Others watching the mist in complete silence. At the center stood the younger version of myself I'd seen in the recording. He wasn't on a monitor now. He was standing only a few feet away. Alive. He turned as I approached. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Finally he nodded. "You made it farther this time. This isn't real." "No." He glanced toward the fog. "But neither is the life you remember." I wanted to argue. To demand proof. Instead I asked the question that had haunted me since the first tape. "What are you?" A tired smile crossed his face. "I'm what you were." He looked at me carefully. "Before you chose to forget." The room around us flickered. The scientists vanished. Then returned. Then vanished again. Like two versions of the same place competing for existence. He didn't seem surprised. "We're running out of time." "What is that thing?" He followed my gaze toward the fog beyond the glass. "I never found a word for it." "Is it alive?" "Yes." "Is it trapped?" "No." He looked directly into my eyes. "We are." A crack spread across the observation window. Not from impact. From age. The glass groaned. Everyone in the room except us continued working as though nothing had happened. Another crack branched across the surface. Then another. The younger me closed his notebook. "It has one question." "What?" "It's been asking since we first arrived." "What question?" He took a slow breath. "It wants to know why we keep building lighthouses." The final word had barely left his mouth when every light in the bunker went out. For an instant, the observation window became a perfect mirror. Instead of one reflection, there were dozens. Every version of Ethan Mercer I'd glimpsed. The weather technician. The scientist. The old keeper. The exhausted man from the security camera. The figure made of fog. They all stood behind me, looking toward the glass. Then, together, they whispered the same three words. "Don't answer it." Something on the other side of the cracked window knocked. 3 slow taps. The glass bowed inward. Once. Twice. A third time. The first crack finally broke through. The crack didn't explode. It sighed. A thin white line opened across the observation window, and for the first time since I'd arrived on Gull Point, the fog on the other side moved with unmistakable purpose. It didn't rush the opening. It paused, as though waiting for permission. Behind me, every reflection of Ethan Mercer disappeared from the mirrored glass. Every one except mine. The 3 knocks came again. Not against the window this time. Against the inside of my skull. Slow. Measured. Patient. Then a voice spoke. Not aloud. Not in English. I understood it anyway. May I come home? I closed my eyes. Every instinct begged me to answer. To say yes. To say no. Anything. Instead, I remembered the first rule that had ever truly mattered. Don't trust voices. So I said nothing. The silence stretched. The pressure behind my eyes became almost unbearable. Then, the knocking stopped. Emergency lights returned one by one. The bunker was empty again. No scientists. No technicians. No younger version of me. Only abandoned desks coated in decades of dust. The observation window remained cracked, but it hadn't shattered. The white fog beyond it had settled into perfect stillness, as though nothing had happened. At my feet lay the leather notebook. Its pages were blank. Every word I'd read had vanished. The bunker alarms activated. A mechanical voice echoed through the corridors. Primary beacon failure imminent. Then again. Primary beacon failure imminent. I looked at my watch. It had stopped. The hands rested at 12:03. I had no idea whether minutes or hours had passed. I climbed the stairs toward the lighthouse 2 at a time. The entire tower vibrated beneath my boots. Stone dust drifted from the ceiling. Outside, the horn sounded continuously now. Not in warnings. Not in conversation. A single endless note that seemed to stretch across both sea and sky. By the time I reached the lantern room, the beam had slowed to a crawl. The great lens turned with obvious effort. Each rotation took longer than the last. Outside, the inland fog stood only a few yards from the lighthouse foundation. It no longer resembled weather. Its edge was perfectly vertical, like a curtain hanging between 2 places. I walked to the control console. The main drive motor was overheating. The backup system had already failed. One final lever remained beneath a cracked glass cover. It bore no label. Only a strip of faded tape with handwriting that looked painfully familiar. Last reset? I stared at it. If I pulled the lever, I might restore the beacon. Or I might destroy the only thing keeping whatever lay beyond the boundary from reaching us. If I left it alone, the light would die on its own. I realized something then. Every person before me had probably stood in this exact spot, faced with the same impossible choice. No certainty. Only consequences. The horn stopped. Complete silence swallowed the island. Even the ocean disappeared again. The lighthouse beam completed one final revolution. As it crossed the inland fog, hundreds of human silhouettes appeared within it. Not trapped. Watching. Some wore old lighthouse uniforms. Some lab coats. Some military fatigues. Some ordinary clothes. They stood shoulder to shoulder, stretching farther than I could see. The gray-bearded keeper was there. He met my eyes. Then, almost imperceptibly, he shook his head. Not toward the lever. Toward the fog. As if warning me not to look any longer. I lowered my gaze. I don't know how long I stood there. Eventually, I reached out. Not for the lever. For the switch that controlled the lantern itself. I turned the light off. Darkness swept over the sea. The great lens coasted to a stop. Nothing happened. 5 seconds. 10. 30. Then, from somewhere beyond the fog, a lighthouse answered. One I couldn't see. Its beams swept silently across the horizon. Then another answered farther away. Then another. One after another, invisible beacons lit the darkness beyond the boundary until the night seemed filled with lighthouses that did not exist on any chart. Our light had gone out. Theirs had not. I don't remember leaving the island. According to the paperwork, a Coast Guard helicopter picked me up the following morning after a systems failure. The official report says I was suffering from dehydration, exhaustion, and acute stress. It says the lighthouse was permanently decommissioned. It says Gull Point was condemned after structural damage made it unsafe. When I asked where the island was now, people looked at me strangely. Some insisted no lighthouse had ever existed there. Others found maps that clearly showed one. The maps never agreed twice. I kept the brass key. Or at least I thought I did. Some mornings it's in the drawer beside my bed. Other mornings the drawer is empty. Weeks later, I find the key in my coat pocket without remembering putting it there. The leather notebook still sits on my bookshelf. Every page is blank. Except sometimes, usually just before dawn, a single sentence appears on the first page. It never stays long enough to photograph. It always fades within minutes. The sentence is always the same. The fog isn't coming closer. You're remembering where it already is. Asterisk asterisk. I stopped trying to convince people my story was true. Maybe it isn't. Maybe the memories I have now are only the latest version. Maybe there really was a weather station. Maybe there really was a divorce. Maybe there really was a lighthouse. Or maybe those are simply the memories that fit best over whatever came before. There is one thing I know. Every few months, usually on nights when the weather forecast promises perfectly clear skies, my radio turns itself on. No matter where I am. No matter whether it's plugged in. I hear a lighthouse horn. One long blast. A pause. Then 3 slow knocks. I've never answered. But last week, for the first time, the voice on the other end didn't call me Ethan. It said, asterisk asterisk keeper 25, asterisk asterisk. Your relief has arrived. When I looked out my window, the street outside my house had disappeared behind a wall of white fog. It wasn't drifting in from the river. It was rolling toward it. And somewhere inside that fog, just before dawn, a beam of light swept silently across my front door.